I think you and I had probably in the past, employed an external organization and spent thousands of dollars to have them come in and just do a gap assessment to say, where are we at on our commercial environment to where we want to be, and to have a capability both from Paramify and Drata to be able to create that tick list to the point that they're saying, cool, if you do these things and you instantiate this environment in a new environment where you can take advantage of the underlying infrastructure provider, say if you go to high or not with the FedRAMP, impact levels, you're able to kind of create that marching order. So then I've had to in the past many times put together like a kind of a level of effort around, hey, how much is it going to take money-wise, people-wise, effort-wise to get us there? And you're like, honestly, in some cases right now, without doing this gap assessment, it's not going to be that accurate to be like $5 million, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be like 24 months. You're like, but with these tools, now you're like, hey, with Paramify, without Paramify, this is probably going to look like. You're going to need X number of GRC team members. You're going to have someone write these thousands of documents. You're going to have someone do this gap assessment. But with something like Paramify, you're able to go through and say, cool, like we have these, you shorten that timeline significantly, a really true springboard into that space that a lot of companies need. Same with Drata being that springboard into the monitoring aspect, find that tick list of things you need to fix and get there faster, which is cool.
Yeah, it's worth it, right? It's worth it to take a look at these tools, because if you don't know what you're doing, geez, it's like, why would you do that to yourself, right? You'll just endure the pain that we know about. We've felt it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a dark place, man.
It really is. PTSD from doing FedRAMP is real.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Paramify Podcast here with my friend, longtime friend, Matt Hillary, CISO at Drata. And I'm just super glad to have you on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks, Kenny. It's just a pleasure to be here. I know we've had amazing folks on the podcast so far, so cool to be among the cool folks that have been on so far.
Well, we keep up leveling here, and so I was super glad to have you on. Matt has got a great history in security, starting out at companies like EY. Then you went to Amazon, and you were there. Right, you were there at the very beginning when cloud was becoming kind of the de facto. Now it's like, why would you not go into AWS? Why would you go into a data center? But you were there in that transition. Later, you went to Adobe, right? And while they were making their transition, leading security and compliance there, then finally, you've been in a bunch of startups, and now you're at another awesome company helping free the captives, right? Helping make compliance a lot easier, right, for people and security. And so you have a lot of problems you've got that you have to deal with on a lot of times. So we're going to dive into all of those. But Matt, thanks again for being here with us, man.
Oh, totally. No, amazing kind of rundown on my background there. But you have to share the story about how we met, Kenny. I was trying to think through on the way here, like, oh my gosh, like, you're one of probably the longest standing folks in this space that I've known. And I think when we first met, I think it was during during our, you were, I think, finishing up your bachelor's, right?
Bachelor's degree, and that was it. Right?
Was it a strategy class?
Yeah.
And I can't even remember the name of the professor. It was like an adjunct, and it was like, and I just remember being incredibly impressed by your ability to write out kind of your thoughts or be very persuasive in writing in a very, very good way from a business standpoint, being like, man, Kenny really knows this stuff. I think we sat next to each other. It was like a later in the day class.
Yeah. We were in group. Yeah, that's right.
And I think you were heading out to go to PwC, right? Or something like that.
That's
and then
right.
I was like, I'll stick around for one more year to do the master's program. But I remember just had a big impression on me at that point in time, thinking, man, Kenny's awesome and really excited about your future there. So anyway, I just want to start by that part and say, hey, it was a fun intersection where we first met.
Yeah. I always say PwC. I mean, great people is a great place to start your career, but I always say best experience to never have again.
It was intense.
It's really intense, right? And I didn't understand anything, and I'm like, wait, what am I doing? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think,
But one of the things I always was impressed with was just your enthusiasm for life. And it's very, very cool to see how that's been applied to, obviously with Paramify, but all throughout your career. And it's one of the distinguishing factors. And so cool to see you still embolden that value throughout your career, even now. So
thanks,
no wonder
man.
Paramify is taking off and doing amazing things.
Thanks, man. Super appreciate it, man. Okay, so let's get into some of the questions. You recently wrote an article in Forbes about privacy by design. I think that's really interesting today. I mean, what is the start date today? It's It's we're in July.
July 10th.
It's really hot outside.
It's supposed to be one of the hottest days this year, tomorrow or something, right?
Yeah. Like Vegas right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's really hot outside. So it's 2024. We're in July, but AWS announced their European Sovereign Cloud, right? And it's really interesting to me because Europe has really led out on privacy. The leadership has come from Europe for obvious reason. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, but where private data is really, really important because there's been some tragic outcomes, right? That comes from leaking of privacy. So that's where that's coming from. We have the U.S. Leading out on security controls like NIST. Like literally every control is just something from NIST and regurgitated in a way that someone wants to. I don't like how they said it.
Yeah. No. I totally get it.
But today, privacy is really being led out on. Europe's really leading out on privacy. They always have been, right? So tell me a little bit about that.
I'm glad you asked about this. So it's part of the Forbes Tech Council, and so we're able to write articles. I think it's the first of many. Some others that I'm considering kind of writing is about mental health as a CISO's one. That should be a pretty fun article to kind of think through, like, oh my gosh, in this role, it's pretty intense. There's a number of others around kind of leading with your team with vulnerability and being a good leader in general. So a lot of leadership aspects that are associated with this role that may not be as hardcore technical, but we decided to start with privacy by design, which is not a new concept since the GDPR came out, right? Back in 2017, I was at Instructure at the time. We had, I don't know how many concurrent users on the platform on Canvas at a time, but it was continued to increase over time. And so when we originally kind of went through the GDPR to figure out how do we apply this idea of privacy by design principle at, Instructure, it was, oh, wow, this has added a new flavor to the whole idea coming from the security community, right? Because the security community is like, give us all your data. We will house it in a secure manner, and this is how we do it, right? But with privacy, it's added that cradle to grave aspect. Is like, hey, only give us these data elements, and then we will do these things with these data elements that may be personal information or otherwise. And then this is how we plan to destroy these data elements when we're done with it and not retain it forever. And so when you think about the shamefulest of breaches, it's usually around having data you're not supposed to have anymore, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, like,
and no one even thought about
it.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, I guess I don't know why we have that still.
Totally. And so when I think about the whole privacy by design, it was just a reminder, and I thought no better time than now to bring up the whole privacy by design stuff, especially when we see Apple release their latest idea with AI Assistant and stuff coming out later this year. The amount of personal information you need to know to be an effective assistant from an AI standpoint is pretty incredible. Like I think about, I have an executive business partner that kind of helps me in my role at Drata, and the amount of information that she knows about me in order to do my role in addition to help supplement me is pretty intense. And so you think about having AI have that level of understanding of my life to be able to help supplement me with the things that I need. I think is going to be pretty material from a privacy standpoint. And so just a reminder to say, how do we do that and bake in privacy by design and make it more preventative versus reactive as we design these capabilities going forward? And I think it's going to be a really interesting scenario. You're right in saying the EU seems to lead out on this front, and the US is like, I want all these cool things, but that means you get everything about me. And you're like, I don't know if you want to have everything about me, but I guess you kind of need it in order to make these things tailored to me. I actually was joking last night with Josh Blackwelder, actually sitting next to him. I'm like, I want AI to build me a troll bot that says, hey, Matt, wake up this morning. It's been 3 weeks since you've last trolled Josh Blackwelder. Do you want to A, do this, or B, do this, or something like that as a good friend? And even just those kind of things where my brain bounces all over the place. And so when I think about an AI assistant trying to catch up with me there, it would be pretty fascinating, but not far out of reach with what we have now. But when we think about privacy, emboldening those principles like we've known for the last number of years as we've incorporated that into our SaaS platforms, how do we add that into the AI side of things? So that's kind of the impetus of the article, and many more to come.
Yeah, for sure. How did you, so we did kind of an overview of how you got here, right? So tell me a little bit about how you got into this space in general. Did you always dream of being a security professional? Or what, right?
It's a great question. In fact, on the way here, I was thinking about this. A few months ago, I gave a talk at B-Sides Salt Lake City. I had never given a talk at a B-Sides conference before, and I was so nervous. In fact, I'm feeling a little bit of it now, but I was up there and people thought I was nervous, and I said I was nervous, but I thought about back on giving that presentation. I'm like, I wasn't nervous there was so much emotion under all the different life principles that I've learned along the way that have been so impactful to me that I'm like, oh my gosh, like I kind of overcame me being a very angry human being, or like, we all have these ceilings along the way that we bounce up against, and then we have to kind of make that progress through. And so when you talk about my journey, just know that a lot of that carries a lot of punch. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of things that have kind of led to where I'm at today. But yeah, I think I usually start presentations with my team saying, like, it's usually that picture of, oh man, Dom from the first Fast and Furious, and he's looking over at Paul Walker, and he's sitting there like, hey man, I live my life a quarter mile at a time. Like during that 10 seconds or less, like, life is just, and I think about my career and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I have lived my career that kind of theoretical, like quarter mile at a time, thinking, hey, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know where I go, but I have these values and I have these drivers and I have these things that I really care about. And really it's about securing meaningful causes, applying the talents that I've been given to the company that I'm at. The real art of a CISO, which may be another future article, is about like being able to take and apply the knowledge that you have around security and tailoring it to organization's needs versus, bringing in like, hey, these are the tools that I use and this is how we do our program. And it ends up being very
rote.
Yeah. And people don't like, it's not as fun. At the same time, it doesn't engage the organization as tailored as it needs to be. And so that's been kind of that fun part of, hey, every single one of those companies that I've been at and every quarter mile that I've done, everyone has been slightly different because everyone's been a different organization. So that has been really the fun part.
Maybe that's why, because you mentioned a lot of the softer side of the CISO that you guys are focusing on is because, most people don't want to do things that, where they encounter friction.
Yeah.
They don't want to do it. And they'll avoid it, right? If something hurts or something sucks. And so that is your job, right? You have to understand, what is their motivator? What are the things that demotivate them?
Yeah.
Where are we going to suck at this? And where are we going to make it a little bit easier?
You're totally right. And one of the things that I learned as well is around conflict styles, like being married almost 20 years. I don't know if you have the same thing. We all have our different conflict styles in marriage, right? And so when I think
it just gets better and better.
Totally. And so when you think about like my conflict style is very volatile. Like you've experienced this where like, oh my gosh, Matt is like explosive. But then you have someone that's like conflict avoidant, right? And so in the organization, you have these same kinds of like styles. And so when CISO says, we need to do this, and someone's like, oh my gosh, he's yelling at me. And it's like, no, it's just very assertive. And both sides have to have that self-awareness to be like, oh my gosh, like we need to know how to better interact with each other. So I'm glad you brought up that point because whether people like friction, there's always going to be friction organizationally. And so as leaders, we have to kind of recognize those different conflict styles and give appreciation for, hey, I need to tone it down a bit here. And there's always, we can talk about neurodivergence too, Kenny, where it's like, oh my gosh, when you bring neurodivergent to neurotypical kind of interactions as well, like this person may ask, a pretty intense question and this person's like, oh my gosh, you're yelling at me, I feel terrible. When it's like, no, I honestly just want to know. And so you've got that layer that's happening too. And so just thinking about how to, when you mentioned friction, I see a lot of friction just around those in engagements with others. And it's taken me a long time to realize these things exist.
Yeah, because like FIPS mode doesn't look cool in an app. Right. It doesn't. In fact, a lot of times it breaks it like, wait, this should work.
Yeah.
So security is literally at odds with, and privacy. Maybe not private. You can make privacy pretty cool, but like security is literally at odds with roadmap almost all the time. And so also those people don't want to be on an audit committee slide. They don't want to be like, hey, you're red. You're not doing this right. And so there's a little bit of social pressure, which is, they don't want to be the bad guy. You don't want to suck. You don't want to be the only one that's not doing it right.
There's an ego there almost,
There's
right?
An ego.
And when you realize sometimes that like, hey, some folks are motivated by that ego and some aren't, that adds another dynamic you have to kind of give awareness to realize, like when I see, like, for example, I'll sometimes disparage, I think, folks that have written articles saying like, hey, I left this company and here's, a number of pages of why this company sucks at security. It's like, honestly, every CISO that knows their company could write a similar note about how their company is not doing well in this area. And that's across the board.
Right.
And so, but then just realizing like, oh my gosh, like it's almost a failure in leadership when it gets to that point, because when you're trying to figure out how do I influence this organization in a way that's going to help progress security, it sucks that one of the motivators is that red dot on an audit slide sometimes, and it's like, oh man, I have to like take a hit at someone's ego to get them to motivate to do something like that.
Right.
That almost sucks, but it's like, hopefully, the way you're able to influence as a leader, regardless of where you sit in the organization as a CISO, you're still able to influence in a way that hopefully that never happens. And almost when I see, folks have to report to the board, hey, we have X number of things that are not being addressed, it's almost like, hey, you need to realize that there's some kind of failure leadership as a CISO that happened to get to that point too. And it's like, how can I do this better? How can I influence better to really have people listen and move?
Versus berating them.
Yeah, totally. Like the almighty board comes down and just like smites you, and you're like, that's not motivating now either. It's painful.
Yeah, most executives don't even care, right? They like stop squabbling, right? They just want it. They want people to work, and I don't know. Maybe the board is like they want to know what are their peer organizations doing.
Yeah,
how are we comparing to them? And then also don't give me a red slide. Right, just don't give it to me, right? Like you just figure it out.
You're totally right about the healthy competition. This is not to say that it's good to have healthy competition across organizations around how well they're doing from a security standpoint. So I like that you call that part out.
Social influence.
Yeah.
There's a book called Actionable Gamification by Yukai Chao, and it is dope. It's really, really great. I totally recommend it, but it talks about the different kinds of motivators that people have. So it's something that I talk about with my team a little bit, knowing that there's different motivators for different people. Within the GRC realm, GRC people, they want to be a part of the solution. They're usually really smart. They're kind of generalists. They know a lot. They know a little bit about a lot, right? And they're kind of those generalists that can bring some really cool, unique solutions to a company. But it's hard for them to do that. It's hard for them to actually make an impact. And so they get buried in all these, manual tasks and everything. So that's where kind of like Drata comes in and other solutions that really help kind of remove friction and make it easier. Because like, let's be honest, no one wants to look at change tickets, right?
100%. Absolutely right. And you bring up a good point saying like now we're at a point where companies like Paramify or companies like Drata are taking the automation first approach. And with that, it's changing the entire conversation between GRC team members and internal team members. Instead of the, hey, it's just your friendly GRC team member checking in. It's been 1 month. Are you still the control owner? Great, cool. Can you give us like a recent example of where you perform your control effectively? You're like, cool. Let alone there may have been 1,200 or 12,000 instances of that operating control over the last month that you're like, do we know if those passed? But now with automation, it's changed it. It's like, we're plugged into your process. We've monitored full population every single day. And the conversations are like, hey, out of these X, number of, instances of this process operating, hey, this one actually seems like it didn't pass our check last night from automation. You know what's going on here. And the controller's like, man, the automation's got my back. The GRC team members got my back. And the conversations around an outlier where we like to go and find and fix and say, what happened here? And so it's very, very cool to see that happen. And you're right, like life's too short to do some of these manual pains. When I think about Paramify, I'm like, oh my gosh, having managed like an A&A package for, larger company manually across 6 different products. And like, you have to make an update here, but it's a shared control across all 6. So you have to make that update across all 6 other packages is like so painful. But the fact that you've built a platform that allows companies to do that and spend more time doing things that really rock as a human, where you're really making impact and meaning versus having to update these documents in such a manual manner is fascinating. And so I've said this before, I think in other forums where, man, tech teams have had their awesome, cool tools for a long time. And security teams, man, they've got some really, really cool tools. It is now time for GRC team members to have just as cool tools to support them. And that includes privacy as well. Right. But like, it's cool to see you and other organizations, come out with this amazing kind of ability to support us to do our jobs better than ever before.
Right. It's like, there's really smart people, right? And when you do security correctly, operationally, there are so many knock-on effects to make things better. From a privacy perspective, I mean, trust is everything, right? So if you enable trust and you do things in the correct way, it's just a better place. It's a better world.
Totally.
Right.
Totally. One thing that's been interesting, Katie, is we just released this compliance as code thing. It's like, I don't know if you saw, but it's like
Yep.
infrastructure as code has been around for a long time, right? But, and to understand what infrastructure as code is, usually that's a pretty hardcore tech team or SRE or DevOps or, infrastructure team will understand what's going on. And then security teams will know that because they're like, hey, infrastructure as code or IAC scanning exists. But with compliance as code, we intersected that. And I'm like, man, what a cool opportunity for GRC team members like you and I that started at PwC or Ernst & Young, where we're like, but we also had a technology background before that saying, man, we still want to incorporate that cool tech into our role as GRC team members, but what a cool way to up-level kind of that acumen of GRC team members to be at the seat of the table with some of the more technical crowd.
100%.
So, but another way of just kind of up-leveling and adding cool technical tools and technical prowess to the conversation for GRC teams.
Yeah. Are you seeing, like, you guys have so many customers, are you seeing like a trend where within GRC, like, hey, I'm only going to work at this company if they have these tools?
It's almost like Slack, right?
Right,
Sorry.
Slack.
I mean, it's
Like
I join a company, I'm like, what's your operational stack look like? They're like, we use Microsoft. Not a dog on Microsoft, but I'm like, oh man.
No,
or like, hey, we use Teams. I'm like, no, okay, we gotta use Slack. We gotta use G Suite. Just, I mean, obviously I'm projecting because I'm like, I love those tools and I want to work out of those tools every day. And if they're not working out of those tools, I'm like, oh man, my brain is like, I can't jump in. It's just almost like oil and water. So you're right. Like, it's like, hey, what tools are you using for GRC, or do you plan to invest in tools for GRC? And if the answer is no, it's like, man, it goes back to the three sucky things about original OG, GRC, which our CEO will sometimes say is like spreadsheets, share folders, and screenshots. Where it's like, oh man, like there's a better way now. So yeah.
How many people? One thing that we run into, like sometimes when we're talking to people, we'll say, hey, they want a silver bullet, they want one ring to rule them all.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I've never seen that.
No, same.
Work well.
Same.
Ever. If you do that, because you can't do everything well, you have to pick. Yeah. You have to pick what you want to focus on.
Yeah, we are seeing some cool tools end up adding to their platform where they're landing and expanding. But it was Brandon DeWitt that was at MX at the time that was telling me, Matt, like, hey, I don't believe in silver bullets, but we got a bucket of lead bullets, right? And so the idea is like, there are shinier bullets in that bucket of lead bullets, but haven't seen that silver bullet. There are a few that I think really are making it hard to move away from. And this is more on the cloud security side of things where it's able to land and they continue to expand to get that contextual analysis. So instead of spitting out a whole bunch of vulnerabilities about this part of your component in your infrastructure, it'll give, hey, there's vulnerabilities on this instance, but this is also 3 hops away from the internet. And in order to exploit it, you have to be network adjacent. So this one's actually a low and not a critical. And so you're really able to use your time wisely on hitting the things that matter the most. So no silver bullets to answer your question, but there are some that have been really shiny lead bullets.
That's a great point. Traditionally, where you kind of lose the meaning in your work is if like you have this task to like remediate 1,200 vulnerabilities that are, I don't know. We have customers that have like literally 4,000 poems.
Truckloads.
4,000 a month, right? That they're managing and looking at every single one. Are you sure? Yeah. And then having to do that analysis of like, dude, ultimately this thing didn't even matter.
Yeah.
Why do we even care about this?
Oh, 100%. Right. And I do like that some of the CVSS scoring now allows you to add certain attributes to add that context. But even with the scoring system, that still is focused on the one component. But once you see that vulnerability in context across the rest of the the infrastructure, and then you're able to add that to say, oh, this is actually critical, but no, it's a low or medium from the actual exploitability. You're able to focus on what matters most, and I think that's cool.
Yeah, so let's dive into common mistakes that you see. There's a lot of work to do. It's really important work. What are some of the top like fails? Right?
Oh man,
you see, right?
No, specific to security or compliance?
Yeah.
Or,
it could be both,
or leadership,
right?
even, or
we could go all 3 levels. We could go leadership.
Oh man.
But when it comes to like security, what are some common fails?
Yeah.
See, right.
One that I think infuriates most folks, and in my experience with technology professionals, if they're really, really good at their role, they're already thinking about security. They're already thinking about privacy. Almost, I think about the most amazing infrastructure team members or application development team members. They're already like embedding that in the way they think, which is cool. What infuriates, I think, them and infuriates security teams is when they're asked to do something that is like I see no value in doing this. I see no risk reduction in this. I don't understand what the bigger picture is here. And, if, security person or compliance person responds, well, this is what it says, or this is why we have to do it. And it's like these effectively not helpful reasons, and they're not explained in a way that helps the other person understand the why. And it really comes down to the whole why is not being able to explain that. If you're not able to, and you're asking someone to do that, and then you're reverting back to like, oh, my ego, like, hey, it's because I'm compliance and you have to do it. Like that, I think is probably one of the biggest fails in both losing trust, losing credibility, and losing your ability to influence, where you're able to, not do that. But if you do come to the table and saying, hey, let's make this collaborative. This is what the tool is saying. This is, can you give us more context to what you're seeing? And they're like, oh yeah, no, that's actually fair. What the tool is saying. Now, just FYI, this is what's going on here. This is what we're doing with the greater roadmap. And so you're able to have that contextualized aspect from the risk conversation. And not only that, but you're also coming to the table with the why. Like you're not even starting the conversation without knowing, hey, here's the why behind we're doing this, us considering do this. And then from there, they realize, oh, hey, this is a human-to-human conversation. I feel safe sharing my thoughts and vice versa. And you end up getting to a resolve that makes sense for both sides. And they're like, cool, let's move forward. Or the decision may be, I agree, like we don't need to take any action on this right now. So one of the biggest failures is not having that kind of dialogue. It's like, I am the almighty person on the team, and you should trust me. It almost is kind of that immediate fail. So as we talk about those three, like leadership, compliance, security, that may be kind of an intersection of all three of those areas.
That's so funny because I have experience like being a perpetrator of said thing, right? Well, I took my first job. I remember in a walkthrough, I didn't have anyone with me, and I was like doing a change today. Hey, can you show me this? And like he's like, you don't know what you're looking for, and I'm like. And I'm like, listen. I'm like, a lot of people don't know.
To give you some grace, like I've done the same thing, right? Like I think we all have, until you realize, like, oh man, like so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, they just asked me. He's like, go back and find out like why we need to do this, and I'm like, all right, like because you don't know at first, and it's super painful, and that's what's so hard about security because it requires you to be, kind of have an understanding of the business, have an understanding of security. Like you think about code security, but it starts with physical security. And if you don't have that, it's just so vast and it just takes a long time. That's why I think it is good just to go to a firm where they're going to give you support and give you some air cover. Yeah. Like, give you some air cover, have seniors that kind of coach you and tell you why certain things are important, because it takes most humans a long time for these principles to watch over them, right? So, and that's why it's important to have that experience. Experience matters. Why is this important? And so I'll go to another area where it's like so frustrating, doing an ISO 27001 audit. I remember, and this is not a handful of times where I've been in those audits, but those are like famous for like, where is your ISMS? And I'm like, well, this is my ISMS, and like, but it doesn't say that on it, so it's a critical finding. I'm like, so if I change this document, and I go ISMS, that's not a critical finding.
You get a green check box. It's like, hey, you got it, right?
They're like, yes.
It's so infuriating. I get it.
It's infuriating. Yeah. And so people say, well, what is the purpose of this?
Yeah.
It's a sticker.
High trust is similar, right? Where it's like, we need to have our statement in your actual policies in some cases. And it's like, oh my gosh. So you're right. Some of those things are painful. And I think it ends up leading to more painful kind of outcome versus the collaborative one. Like, hey, there's a risk. The reason why these standards exist, I think, at the beginning is taking it back to risk management, saying, hey, what could go wrong in the company? Cool, here are the risks, here are the controls. Okay, these are pretty standard across most companies. So let's create these frameworks to kind of help along that front. And so I think when you look at all the controls, going back to what the risk is covering and how it applies to the company really helps aid in that conversation. I was just thinking as you're talking, Kenny, about another kind of not fail, but as a leader, one of the things that I struggle with the most is when I don't know. if it's a risk or not, right? Like I'm like, hey, someone comes to me and says, hey, we just did this acquisition. Like here are these number of findings that we need to consider. Like, do we need to fix these findings? Are we going to end of life this component? And this is at other companies that I'm at now, but where it's like, hey, we have inherited this risk. What do we do in this case? And it's like, man, I don't have the data yet to make a decision. And you can like go to this analysis paralysis mode where it's like, I need to go to everything. But at the same time, it's like, I still don't feel comfortable making a call yet. And that's really, as a leader, that's another kind of struggling thing. And I'm sure it infuriates other people in the company. We're like, we just need you as a leader to be like, oh man, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger on the Simpsons movie where it's like, I was elected to lead, not read, number 3, and he chooses the option to go forward. And I'm like, I can't do that either. And so it's like, just know as a leader.
That's why CISO role is hard.
Oh, it's
I'm like, yeah. It's hard, right?
It's a balance for sure.
It's for sure, right? Because you're like, why do we care about this? And you need to know why we care about it. And I think that is why, you show me what is the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. And that's why we have stickers, right? Because it's emboldened by the fact like, hey, I have this SaaS component. I need to know that it's safe to do business with this person. And so you get back to those simple rote, like, do they have a sticker or do they not have a sticker?
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, if they do, they're like, okay, great.
Totally.
We can do the deal.
Yeah. And ultimately that sticker is hopefully the trust that you've earned to the company, right? And it's hopefully founded by like the integrity behind the whole approach. You're right. Some folks may be like, I just need to get this sticker as fast as possible. When in reality, it's like, hey, most of us are pretty, I'm projecting here, but most of us are pretty achievement motivated in the GRC space where we want to do the right thing and we want to be able to demonstrate good integrity. And so what I do see more than not is people are really behind the scenes wanting to do it the right way and wanting to get that sticker that really represents the hard work behind the scenes. So, yeah. Okay,
so motivators then, right? Motivators, we talked about GRC people, they want to do the right thing. They have a mission. They want to accomplish things too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some motivators for your teams, right? Something maybe that you learned that you're like, oh, that's an interesting motivator. I never thought that might be hard. I don't know.
That's a really good point. I think all of us are driven by different things, right? And so I think the motivators vary. One that hasn't been surprising, but just more heartening. I think different temperaments of people have different, like some are very achievement motivated, so they want to have. Like, for example, in Drata, we have like this dashboard that shows you, hey, this is your percentage of compliance across all your frameworks, right? And you're like, cool, as of the test running last night, this is where you stand. You're like, oh, cool. But for me, like, I'm like, oh, shoot, looks like we have 3, tests that failed last night. And it's almost like every day, people have to go in and kind of see what got missed because it is doing that full population check. And so that motivator to be like, I got to get this to 100% every day. I got to see what's going on. And ultimately that is demonstrating integrity, I think, when you're that engaged with your GRC and your program to make sure that you really are doing what you're saying you're doing every day of the audit period, not just hopefully kind of passing the audit on a prayer. Hopefully they don't select those samples that have failed, that kind of thing, right? Where I've seen kind of behaviors in the past where it's like, there was, I think, one incentive at a company where it was like, 0 exceptions on audits. And it was like, it really drove different kinds of behaviors that I was surprised by. So when you talk about motivators, one was like, if I'm the one that causes this exception to show up on this report, like that's going to be bad for me. It's going to be bad for my team. It's going to be bad for the organization. And they look at it that direction first.
Social influence.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And they look at it in that order. Like the order is me, and the next is my team's brand, and the rest is the company versus looking at hey, how does this impact the company and then the team and then personally? It's almost a different. So those 2 styles of thinking, I think, have 2 different motivators.
Yeah. And how do you optimize for both of them? Because those motivators like, social influence and loss and avoidance, those are kind of those are little levers that are, can be short-term.
Yeah.
The long-term ones are hard, right? Like, where's the meaning I'm getting out of this? My sense of accomplishment, those take a lot of work. Right. So those are like demotivators, right? Like, I don't want to be the one.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And some companies, I think the stakes are a little different, right? For example, like we'll see some breaches at companies where their stock price will take a hit, but then it's back higher than ever now, right? And you're hey, did it have that impact? But like a company like yours or mine, where we really are having to maintain that trust every single day, almost like to level of perfection needed to say, you're a security company or you're a compliance company or you're a GRC company, like you need to set the bar for how it's supposed to be done. But in reality, we're still humans behind the scenes running the programs and being like, oh my gosh, the impact for this may be much higher than an impact at another organization. Just that is one dissonance that kind of sticks in my mind. And so going back to what you're saying about, what motivates us, it's like, at the organizational level, this would have a catastrophic impact here versus another company it may not be and may be able to recover. And it's like, so know that those motivators may need to be applied differently in those kind of differing impact scenarios.
Yeah. And those are like really tied to your mission.
Yeah.
Right. Adobe's mission, for example, is not security. They didn't exist for security, but
it's like create digital experiences or something like, which is great.
Right? Which is great. And it's a phenomenal company.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's not very many cash printing machines like Adobe.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
It is a great organization. And so those motivators are different, but you're right. For when Okta, like I know those guys, right? When Okta has something happen, I mean, it's hard.
Yeah. All of our cards collectively skip a beat because we're like, what happened in Okta?
Yeah. What happened? And that from a business perspective, that's a lot more challenging for them. You know, and they're really best in class. They have like a best in class organization. It's just hard, right? Yeah. So it's important to understand that as a CISO, it's just a different level of, Matt, don't F this up, man.
Oh, 100%. And you're right. It's a dissonance that kills me almost some days. I remember one time being like, from a mental health standpoint, thinking about.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about it.
Right? You're thinking about, oh my gosh, like I can literally do everything and still fail at this job. And there's a human behind it that's really trying to do their very best. And I hope if something were to happen in the future, that there's some grace given to say there was some good faith effort made by a human here in a good way, that there is some grace extended there. But I think it's almost the opposite that happens when a breach happens. It's like fingers are pointed, but they forget that there's 3 fingers of likelihood pointing back at them, that something similar may happen to them. And it's a dissonance that just echoes in my mind all the time as part of being like, oh my gosh, in this role, Matt, know that no company is impenetrable. It's not a comforting thought either to think that like all of us could be subjected to these things, but it does kind of give some grace to say, look, like in my communications with my leadership team members or our board members or whoever else, to say, look, like we're trying our best. This is what we have. Know that all of us are collectively subjected to this dissonance. It's not just the CISO that's tagged with that. Hey, I call it, I don't know if you watch Star Trek, but the Kobayashi Maru is like the unwinnable scenario that they put all the captains of Starfleet through.
I watched the newer movies.
All good.
I like those.
They're great. But in the original Star Trek, there's like this Kobayashi Maru that all the Starfleet cadets have to go through to become a captain. Okay. It's the unwinnable scenario where the entire crew dies. The only person that passed was James Kirk, the main guy, where he's like, and the reason he did it is because he cheated, right? It was funny, but it's a whole funny story behind that whole thing. But I think about the security leader's role. It really is that Kobayashi Maru where it's like, we will literally do everything and potentially still fail. And that sucks. And so as a mental health aspect there, being like, how do you give awareness to that? I sat down with a friend and they're like, Matt, your brain is so mechanical engineering like minded. Like my brain is very, very, again, like a mechanical engineer wired like the way it's like and mechanical engineers like to have smallest tolerances, or they want to be able to have the fewest parts to fulfill the, the ultimate mission of whatever product you're putting out there. And when I think they had to sit me down and be like, Matt, that doesn't apply. You can't apply that thinking to the security space. You can try to minimize risk, but at the same time, know it's a challenge, and you're just going to continue to suffocate your brain negatively by thinking down to you're going to be, closer to 100%, covered from a security compliance standpoint, and realizing, Matt, there's always going to be some variance there. It's going to suck if that gets taken advantage of from this standpoint in this role. But know that, as you continue to document what you're doing. I know some CISOs after, I think when, the CISO was gone after by the SEC, saying like, hey, like gone after personally, saying like, hey, I'm sure we'll see more and more of this going forward. And it's like, that's painful, because as a security leader, you're like, either one, security leaders are burying their head in the sand and not writing anything, so it's not discoverable, or they're like writing everything out to say, look, we identified this risk on this day. We're doing this for this risk. We're trying to get, this risk mitigated. This is and really trying to demonstrate good faith effort towards trying to burn down that level of security risk that every company has. But realizing that minimal, like still kind of that risk exists there, it's not a fun reality.
Mm-mm. Yeah. No. Yeah. Because you can never get risk to zero.
Yeah.
So it is a matter of like your likelihood goes down when you have a focus. You can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want.
Yeah.
You got to pick.
Totally.
Right. And so again, it is your ability to be able to persuade people on, I guess, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you can get, I mean, obviously controls do work, right? Yeah. They make you more resilient.
Oh, absolutely. And
against
especially
risk.
ones that are crafted to the company, right? Based off their
Mm,
processes and you design that well, it's like, why do we have this? So yeah, no, no, good call.
yeah. All right, man. So just kind of wrapping up. What who are some of the mentors that have really helped you,
Oh
right,
man.
get to where you are, and how important is that?
That's a great
Yeah.
question. As I thought back, I think one that stands out is Brandon DeWitt at MX. We lost Brandon, a couple of years ago, a few years ago to cancer.
Sorry.
I think it was at MX when it was like I can't remember which round of relapse of cancer happened, but I remember Brandon pulling me aside, and it was after a really tough interaction with a coworker. You've probably been victim of this in the past, where like the Matt Hillary rage, and I remember I was frustrated. You're right, like the friction that I was feeling, we talked about, hey, the organization doesn't like to feel friction. But for me, I was like, I don't want to feel friction either in kind of doing the security
Mm,
mission for the company. And at the time, like, my very, volatile kind of reaction style had caused this like disconnection with this person. And I've since repaired that with that person and sat down. I'm like, hey, look, like, I've realized that there's been lots of like built up energy behind the scenes. But Brandon pulled me aside. He's like, Matt, he drew a graph on the board. He's like, here's a ceiling, right? He draws a horizontal line. And he basically draws like, hey, all of us are progressing in our career and we'll hit these ceilings. And many of us will bounce off of those ceilings and never break through it, which is a sad story that like, hey, without the self-awareness, without a friend, without someone that can point out saying, look, there's a ceiling here that you're hitting up against and you're hitting up against it often. And I know that you can break through it and you can do it. But if you keep bouncing out, you continue to do that. And if you continue to do that, you may not have a job here, or you may not have the friends you want to have, or you may not be able to do what you at your core want to do in life. But
wow.
you can really breach through it. And he's like, Matt, this is a ceiling for you, and I know that you can breach past this, and I know that you can go to higher heights. And I remember that being a huge moment for me that they took a second chance and saying like, Matt, like, hey, cool, like going forward. And he's like, there's a lot of self-discovery around kind of where that's at. And so
Wow.
that kind of kicked off me walking into a therapist's office being like, I don't want to be an angry human being anymore. What do I need to do? And so all of us have those ceilings, whether it be that or whether it be a number of other things. And I keep finding them. And it's almost a frustrating part of life. But just know that from a mentor standpoint, him and a number of other anecdotes
Wow.
that he shared kind of over the course, I think, of my time there were so impactful that it's kind of been part of my career. But that was one that I at least call out, and I still apply it now. I'd be like, oh my gosh, we're all on this journey, just like a security journey at a compliance security company. We're all on this journey. No one's there yet. It seems like our own leadership growth has been similar there too.
It's really powerful, Matt. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that and the vulnerability. Yeah, like I think you're too hard on yourself, man. Right? I like literally. I think there's greatness. There's always a little imbalance in greatness, right? And you're one of the good guys, man. You're one of the good ones, right? So, I think, yeah, that's really powerful. Awesome. I'm glad you shared that and a really specific story. Yeah. So, what are my ceilings? I got a lot of them, and yeah, wow, that's cool. So, be a mentor, right? Be a mentor to others. Pay
Yeah.
it forward.
Oh man, no, I was gonna
Right.
say the
Yeah.
last night I asked a bunch of CISOs. I was like, because we had this dinner, and I'm like, hey, what question we're gonna ask them as part of the intro? And one of them was like, what do you absolutely love about your job being a security leader? And the second was like, what do you absolutely hate about being a CISO?
Yeah.
It's kind of fun to see the dichotomy of the answers. But for me, I absolutely love being able to share those talents that I've had with other folks and help them grow in their career, whether they want to listen or not. Sometimes it's like, oh man, this person doesn't want to grow, or they do. It's when they do, and they're like, man, I really appreciate you taking a moment to share this with me. Is awesome. On the hate side, I think sometimes with the nature of the security and compliance world, I don't know if you've ever seen this thing called the CISO mind map, but I think it's I can't remember him. I think it's one of the security leaders at Verizon put it together. But it's a CISO mind map. Basically, maps out everything that CISO needs to worry about, and it's like an ADHD brain's dream, but it's also the rest of the world's nightmare because you have like literally
Mhm.
hundreds of things that you need to worry about as a security leader, and some it doesn't even include sometimes IT, AI is a new domain, and it just continues to grow more and more. And if you're a CISO at a security company, you've also got product and customers,
Mhm.
and you've got marketing, and you've got thought leadership thoughts, and you're like and sales, and it's a ton more. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is a ton of things. And so in my brain, I love it, but it also eats up a lot of my own personal life. in a bad way, where it's like this parasite that's like totally latched onto everything in life. I don't know if you experience the same thing, especially starting a company where you're like, your brain is probably just immersed all day long in what you're building, to the point that you're like, oh my gosh, it's this parasite. And it's not until you actually take like a week or a few days away from work to realize, oh my gosh, this exists. I need to pull this away, and then kind of reset my expectations on how I engage in this role. So yeah, it's been a wild ride.
If you try to do it all by yourself, you're going to fail, right? Just because security is vast and we need to have a lot of help, right? And always, right? And just being a parent, right? If you do everything for your kids, you're going to be stressed out, and it's going to be hard. And if you try to control every outcome with your kids, you're going to be stressed out. So you're wanting to set people up, make it easy to do the right thing. Remove the friction around the quick, like say, hey, there's quicksand here. Let's avoid that, and convince people. So it is a really challenging aspect, because ultimately you got to trust people, right? You need others. Right. Yeah. So again, we talked a little bit about silver bullets. You can't be, you kind of got to pick what you're going to be good at. So for us, for Paramify, I never thought that I would ever, Drata, Vanto, like whoever it is. I was like, that's hard, right? That's hard to do, but how can I work with them? Right. And so it's exciting to see like where we're starting to see like, hey, we could actually be really complementary. We're not competing here. And there's a lot of tools. There's so many things, but what are your thoughts on that? Like tools working together?
Oh, absolutely. I think in the security and GRC space, there's a lot of complementary capabilities that I think mentioned earlier in the podcast, just thinking about your values in Paramify is like automating these processes and helping kind of like scale the ability to manage such a manual, painful aspect of the GRC world is one of those shared values, I think, with Drata, where it was like, oh my gosh, how can we use automation to replace the pain that exists prior to, Drata's existence? And so there's very much complementary. So the way I see the complementary aspects happening is like, you're very, very deep in the FedRAMP space, right? Where it's like, oh my gosh, I want to help companies be able to make that very difficult journey towards getting an authorization from a government agency. And along that pathway, there's documentation, there's people, there's environments you have to set up. And then after, you are able to demonstrate and prove your worth for their authorization that they give you, you then have to continually, on an ongoing standpoint, monitor your, ability to stay compliant after the fact. I think there's a lot of complementary aspects with Paramify and Drata along that pathway. One is, Paramify does the documentation piece incredibly well. Like when you did your demonstration at B-Side Salt Lake City, I was just being ear to ear, being like, oh my gosh, what a cool product. Like so cool to be able to see this in action, where a company who has, like a person at a company, usually it's one or two on the port, the GRC team or the port team member that has to actually go through and do all that work to get those packages ready for a government to consume is, it's a lot of effort. It consumes, thousands of hours. I love when you show up to conferences with the 45-pound, the big bar. And then on each side, you've got each one of the, the 8A packages. And it's like these massive binders. And it's the reality of like how much weight and pain and effort goes into doing that. And so cool to see that you've seen that, very big challenge. And it's not only outside of the agencies for CSPs, but also inside agencies. I know many folks will do internships at agencies where they are the person having to read and consume all those and make an opinion for the agency to decide whether or not to authorize their own use of a product internally. And it's like, man, so complementary in the sense that, the documentation piece is there, the ability to help relieve that burden in a very, very strong way is awesome. On our side, where Drata really excels is on that automation first aspect. We're able to monitor environments to let people know where they stand every day of the audit period. Right now, Drata is not an authorized CSP. So when it comes to an authorized kind of environment in that area, like we can't connect into those environments to monitor because it has, we would be pulling security relevant information, which I think fits in that second bucket of like,
it's our first problem. I'm like, hey, so okay, so are you guys FedRAMP? Like, no. We're not.
But the document's like, hey, sure, better than using like Word or like using Jira or whatever, maybe, right?
So we're like, we'll deploy on-prem. They're like, great.
Perfect.
Right, for now, but that's not going to scale. Yeah. Right? Eventually we have to.
You're totally right. You're totally right. And so in that case, the monitoring piece where we can kind of complement each other, I think, is on the journey there, saying many people will basically take a replica or instantiation of their existing commercial environments and create a specific FedRAMP environment where they can apply those increased controls, those higher burdened operating controls. They don't want to incur that cost in their commercial environments. And so Drata will monitor those commercial environments. And then I think have the ability to run those tests against, kind of the NIST N53 controls, whatever slice of FedRAMP, moderate, high, low, or like low impact SaaS. Maybe another one to say, where do you stand today with your existing environment to create that tick list of items to get you to where you're operating those controls. And I think that's it's almost orthogonal to the documents, but at the same time supplements what would actually feed right into the documents anyway, to say, oh, you integrate with Okta for authentication. Like you guys, I think, have the ability to basically generate content to describe, oh my gosh, AC2 being one of the biggest controls and IA2 being one of the biggest controls to document on how you do those things. But if you say, I use this capability in this environment, you're able to elastically generate a lot of that information. And where Drata would monitor saying, cool, like, yes, this is enabled and these people are actually in these appropriate areas and so on and so forth.
Validation, right?
Yeah.
The technical validation versus the description and organizing all that.
Because I think you and I have probably in the past, employed an external organization and spent thousands of dollars to have them come in and just do a gap assessment to say, where are we at on our commercial environment to where we want to be, and to have a capability both from Paramify and Drata to be able to create that tick list to the point that are saying, cool, if you do these things and you instantiate this environment in a new environment where you can take advantage of the underlying infrastructure provider, say if you go to high or not, what's the FedRAMP, impact levels, you're able to kind of create that marching orders. So then I've had to in the past many times put together like a kind of a level of effort around, hey, how much is it going to take money-wise, people-wise, effort-wise to get us there? And you're like, honestly, in some cases right now without doing this gap assessment, it's not going to be that accurate. It's going to be like, $5 million, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be like 24 months. You're like, but with these tools, now you're like, hey, with Paramify, without Paramify, this is probably what's going to look like. You're going to need X number of GRC team members. You're going to have someone write these thousands of documents. You're going to have someone do this gap assessment. But with something like Paramify, you're able to go through and say, cool, like you have these, you shorten that timeline significantly, a really true springboard into that space that a lot of companies need. Same with Drata being that springboard into the monitoring aspect, find that tick list of things you need to fix and get there faster, which is cool.
Yeah, it's worth it. Right? It's worth it to take a look at these tools, because if you don't know what you're doing, it's like, why would you do that to yourself, right? You'll just endure the pain that we know about. We've felt it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's a dark place, man.
It really is. The PTSD from doing FedRAMP is real. And you're absolutely right. Looking back and thinking, oh my gosh, the naivety around doing FedRAMP is so real because many folks have not yet experienced it. But having experienced it, it's like, oh man, do I want to experience that again? It's almost like a therapy session trying to figure out what you do.
We have emotional people sometimes. They're just like, wow, like they're just, it's the same thing. It is a great time to be in this space. Matt, I really appreciate you coming, my friend. Like that was really awesome. And thank you for just being so open and personal, right? You're great, right? So thanks so much for coming in.
Right back at you, Kenny. Thanks for having me. You're just an incredible human and incredible company you're building, and so excited to see you guys continue to grow and progress. So I appreciate you having me here too.
Right on, man. Thanks, guys.